Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss If, or Imaginary Friends, starring Kaylee Fleming, Ryan Reynolds, John Krasinski, Phoebe Waller-Bridges, Fiona Shaw, Steve Carell, and Louis Gossett Jr., directed by John Krasinski. Now, before I get into this is a movie with half animated, half live action, and will this work for any ages or anybody in general? Well, I did see the movie twice. The first time I saw it was with an audience, I want to say, of 20 people, whereas the second time I went and saw it with well, I'm not going to explain any further, but it's for a company, I'll say. So let's get into this movie and we'll see how this goes. We open with a cute Paramount logo, and we start off with Bee as a young girl with her mother and father, the father who is played by the movie's director John Krasinski, as they seem like a happy family. And this opening is cute at best, as director John Krasinski does a good job of pulling off cute. Bee is now 12 years old and played by Kaylee Fleming, and she stays in her grandmother's house or apartment, I'll say, and the grandmother is played by Fiona Shaw, while the father is in the hospital and Bee acts more like an adult, and her father acts like more than that, I'll say, like she is a little girl as he shows her how to dance with the mop, which was cute. And he brings Janet, who is a nurse at the hospital, and I honestly don't know why her father is in the hospital to begin with, as they never do explain why, other than a surgery, but the audience doesn't need to know, whereas this is a PG rated movie, so the kids don't really need to know. The movie takes place in New York, which looked good in this movie, which I've been there only a couple of times, as Bee watches some TV with her grandmother, which happens to be in black and white, and Bee sees a video camera with some memories while she grabs a charger at a convenience store, and on the way home, she finds an If, which is short for an imaginary friend, named Blossom, voiced by Phoebe Waller-Bridges, as she gets back to her home with Cal, played by Ryan Reynolds, and Bee tries to talk with Cal, and he says, go away, and she comes back home now, and she comes back home, and I do like Ryan Reynolds' presence, but the audience doesn't see what the effects looked like until later in the movie, even though you might have seen the trailer, sure. I'll get there when I get there. Bee gets to the hospital and she meets Benjamin and visits her father afterhand, and at nighttime, Bee hears Cal and Blossom again as she follows them into an apartment where Cal finds a purple imaginary friend named Blue, voiced by Steve Carell. While in a little girl's bedroom, which looked awkward, while not only the little girl can't see Blue, but I get the impression she can't see Cal, and I'm guessing he's in Bee's imagination, which is when I figure out he was in her imagination as the little girl, and by she, I'm talking about Bee's imagination, as a little girl cannot see Cal, which felt obvious when I get to the end of the movie. Meanwhile, Bee is knocked out by what she just saw and wakes up in Cal's apartment, and she meets Blue, Blossom, and Cal as he says it's been a while since he's seen her. And there's another clue to how you would know Cal is in Bee's imagination, as Bee had a kid named Jeremy. No, Blue, excuse me. Blue had a kid named Jeremy, and so did Blossom, and same with someone else who we'll know later in the movie. But Blue looks adorable, but the CGI looked fine. But I heard Steve Carell in his voice and his laugh, which felt very distracting in my opinion. Bee wakes up to the grandmother making her some pancakes, and she goes to the hospital to visit her father, and while she's there, she finds Blue in the laundry basket and finds Benjamin witnessing her talking to an If, and she brings him back to Cal as she has a job to help the Ifs find themselves a kid so they can be happy again and still coexist, which is a cute premise, sure, but come on. Any kid has an imaginary friend, so John Krasinski did the right thing writing the movie and bringing them to life in a movie, I'll say. They get to a carnival where the Ifs live in and visit the Ifs, starting with Lewis, voiced by Louis Gossett Jr., whom I guess I reviewed him before in Jaws 3, but do not remember him in it. And I knew his name somewhere, and and it was bugging me after my first viewing of this movie. And I like Lewis as a wise bear that kind of looked like Winnie the Pooh in that movie Christopher Robin, as it looked good, but in my opinion, not the greatest use of CGI. Meanwhile, the plot is sort of thin, but I'll give credit to Krasinski for bringing this to life. The Ifs come to the carnival where there are other Ifs are living at until they have a kid to become friends with, as B helps them out and she becomes partners with Cal while he keeps tripping over Keith, which is done for comedic reasons that aren't quite working for me. And B visits her father as she spots Benjamin and asks if he's ever had an imaginary friend, as she and Cal interview the Ifs for Benjamin, and they introduce Benjamin to the Ifs, in which he can't see any of them, which felt problematic, as well as the language, as Ryan Reynolds does curse a little briefly in this, but which didn't feel really PG rated in my opinion. But and this movie has problems for sure, but there's times it's heartwarming for sure. Lewis tells B to close her eyes and imagine the carnival with the Ifs as well as their kids, and I did like these shots, as that scene is the only time the shots felt very real, as this was a heartwarming. And at this point, I'm finding this movie just to be okay, as it is cute. It's at best cute. The father sees the footage of the camera while B has dinner with the grandmother, and B asks her what she wanted to be as a little girl, and she said she always wanted to be a dancer. And she sees a photo of her dancing, as she unfortunately said she grew up and grew too old, and B realizes Blossom was her If, and she wants to take Blossom, as B takes Blossom to her grandmother's apartment and plays the song where her grandmother danced to as a kid, and the grandmother gets a flashback as she dances while she's connected to Blossom's heart, as she glows, and Blossom dances with her grandmother, with B and Cal seeing that and that was a heartwarming scene. And this is when the movie starts to get heartwarming, as this and the plot kicks in, which did take a while, as this scene was beautiful. And If gets to a file to the whereabouts of Blue's friend Jeremy in New York City, and they see him go to a coffee shop, and he goes to the bathroom to wash up because he's nervous about meeting his friend, and also a meeting he has to go to. And B, Cal, and Blue follow him to his meeting, and he sees some croissants, and he's reminded of Blue, and Blue sits next to Jeremy, and feels his heart as Blue glows, and it's briefly interrupted as he's still nervous and just stands there until Blue warms his heart and saying he's okay, and that really felt heartwarming. Despite this isn't the greatest writing, but I'll accept it for what it is, which is a heartwarming moment of the film. The grandmother tells B about her father's surgery, as she doesn't know how it went, and she rushes to the hospital and sees her father is alive, and she tells him her story that he brought up a couple of times in the movie, while the Ifs suddenly disappear, and so does Cal, and the father takes some boxes to move her back with him, and she accidentally spills a box full of stuff when the father was a kid, and she realizes Cal is his father's If, as was all the other Ifs were in her family. And that's why she sees them to begin with, which was a little predictable, as I knew that was coming from the first she meets Cal. And she hugs him goodbye, and she says she'll always need him, especially when she grows up, and they leave. And every If connects with their kid that are adults and that are working and hugging them. And Benjamin finally has an If, and after the credits, there's a farewell to Louis Gossett Jr., who was recently, as March 29th, 2024, has passed away. And this is a farewell to him, and the climax was heartwarming at the end of the day. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 6.0 out of 10. New York looks good, and the cinematography is also good, but not great in this. While this movie does have a cute premise, while a heartwarming ending, and the CGI looked good, but honestly not great. And kudos to writer director John Krasinski for writing a movie about imaginary friends and bringing it to life. And I enjoyed the after credit scene, as this was Louis Gossett Jr.'s last movie, as it felt like a rest in peace movie for him. The plot was sort of thin, as this felt a little bit of point a plotless, as that was a problem. And this movie has problems for sure, and like it takes a while to get to the real point of the movie. And I like the If characters, but the one that felt more distracting was Blue, as far as his voice is concerned, because Steve Carell felt a little obvious as far as his voice and versus his laugh. And I do like him, while his If character is adorable, but it's not great, and they are good characters. I'll say they're adequate in my opinion. At the end of the day, this was a heartwarming movie, as it had a heartwarming third act, and I'm going to give this movie a mild recommendation, as it was okay, as it's good for kids and adults at any age. So give this movie a look at. Come on, every kid, because come on, every kid has an imaginary friend, as this climax was heartwarming. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for the John Krasinski retrospective. And until he ever makes another movie, surprise, it's an If.